Louisiana may be closer to finalizing the congressional maps. A close 5-4 decision at the Supreme Court secured a second black voting district in Alabama, galvanizing a group of Louisiana voting advocates pushing for a similar outcome here. Voters hope a similar ruling will force lawmakers to redraw congressional maps before the High Court recesses this summer. Barry Irwin, Cable President and CEO, talks about how this decision could impact elections in Louisiana. Before we get into more current events surrounding the congressional maps, let's start with the basics. Last year, Louisiana lawmakers tried to redraw our voting districts, but what happened?
Well, we had a special session last year for the particular purpose of redrawing all the districts that changed because of the census count. We went through a lot of anguish. It was a very contentious legislative session, but basically they passed a map that's very similar to the one that we had before, we have 6 congressional districts. It had 5 majority white districts and 1 minority black district. There was a big push to try and say we should have 2 minority districts, mainly because the population has changed over the last 10 years. The African-American population has actually grown a little bit while the white population had fallen. But at the end, we kind of ended up where we started with 5, majority white districts and 1 minority district.
What was the reasoning for creating 1 large black voting district instead of, dividing it into 2?
Well, one of them, I think, is that people said that's what we had. That's what we had before. The courts had approved that. It had passed muster, and so we're just going to do what we did before. Now, of course, the argument was because the population had actually changed and the African-American population had gone up, well, then we should maybe rethink that and see if we can draw 2 majority-minority districts. And many of them were proposed. There were probably 5, 6 of them that were put out there. But at the end of the day, they just decided to go with pretty much the same kind of configuration we already had.
Now, of course, this also created a lot of controversy. It went to the U.S. District Court Judge Shelley Dick, and she struck this map down. She said that there should be another district. What were her findings in the case? What was her reasoning?
Well, basically, what she found was that the map that the legislature drew this time was a violation of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which is the one that deals with fair, equality in terms of elections and congressional, and different districting and all that type of thing. She said it was a clear violation of that, and that's kind of where it stood until the Supreme Court stepped into it.
When did the Supreme Court get involved?
It wasn't long after she had actually made that ruling, and she told the legislature that you need to go redraw some more maps or I'm going to do that. The legislature did not do that, and she was prepared to, I think, release some maps, and then the Supreme Court decision basically came down. That basically put our whole election or redistricting portion of it on hold, and that's kind of where we ended up.
All right, and so our map is still on hold, but I think lawmakers were waiting to see what was going on in Alabama because I understand there was a similar case going on there.
Yeah, it's very similar. Theirs was a little ahead of ours in the process, so that's why there was a ruling by the Supreme Court ahead of ours. But basically, it was the same argument. They have 7 congressional districts instead of 6, but they had more than 20, I think it's about 28% of their population is African American. And so the argument was we should be able to draw 2 African American majority districts out of our maps too. The Supreme Court basically agreed with the argument there and sent it back to the court in Alabama. The key thing for us here is that our arguments that are being made in Louisiana's case are very similar. The facts and the evidence are very similar. So there's a lot of speculation that the same thing that happened in Alabama will likely happen with the Louisiana maps.
So suppose this does happen and we do get 2 separate voting districts for the black population here. How does that impact election season?
Well, it's hard to say because it really deals with the timing. It's a congressional seat that we're talking about, and so those elections are every 2 years. So we just had one, but in 2024 we'll have it again. So the Supreme Court term ends this month, so it's possible that because the Louisiana case was so similar to the Alabama case, they could say, let's go ahead and send that back to the lower courts and let them sort it out. Or they may hold it over till the term begins, the new term, which doesn't begin until October. That would really kind of push the time frame back and kind of put it very much in limbo. But right now, it's really a function of trying to figure out what the Supreme Court will do on it.
And of course, there's no way to really know that. So there's really no set timeline of when we'll know exactly what our congressional maps will look like.
No, because one, you've got the court to decide what it's going to do. Probably what it would do if it sends it back, it would send it back to the Court of Appeals, And what the Court of Appeals would likely do is then send it back to that district judge who originally ruled that the maps were in violation of the Voting Rights Act, and she would probably order the legislature to draw some more maps. The legislature could probably go through that same exercise of deciding whether they choose to do that or let the judge do it. And so that could really stretch things out for some period of time. So it's really unclear for 2024 what the maps are going to look like when we run again.
All right. Well, thank you for coming down and explaining this entire process to us. We really appreciate it.
Glad to do it.